The difference between knowing our worth and owning it is when we come into ownership of all that we are, right? All the lessons, all the mistakes, all the beauties, all the talents, all the challenges. And we say, this is who I am. This is all of me. I accept and I respect it. And I know that I have a contribution to make.
Hello, and welcome to the Connect podcast. This show is all about helping you connect to your soul's calling so you can take action on it. Because the sweetest success is a blend of discovering your purpose with the inner drive to bring it to life. I'm Sheila Botello, health coach, lifestyle entrepreneur, and mom of two, best known for my online wellness programs, mentoring, and self-love passion. Listen in for inspiring interviews, solo chats, and Q&A sessions that will move you past overwhelm towards what lights you up. Stop accepting good enough and go for your version of great in your health, business, and relationships. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to Interview Day on the podcast. I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's guest. Baird is a podcast consultant, host, and producer who teaches creators how to attract their dream customers through the power of their voice. She consults on podcast strategy, coaches hosts and production teams, and hosts podcasts of her own. After 6 years in corporate sales, Christine did a career 180 and has been working in podcasting, event production, and influencer branding since 2014. She worked on Lewis Howes' brand, The School of Greatness, for 4 years, where she got to grow his top-ranked podcast from less than 1 million downloads to over 80 million. Now she's pivoted to supporting creators to launch and grow their shows and impact. She consults and strategizes on personal brand and branded podcasts, and she trains teams to become in-house producers of high-quality media. She's also the owner of Worthfull Media, a boutique podcast production agency. Christine hosts her own podcast, Worthfull Project, and is the co-host of the Think Like a Producer podcast. She's passionate about owning her worth and inspiring others to do the same. It was so fun to talk career transition, personal development, spirituality, and about a life-changing practice she implemented after getting married last year. Congratulations on your marriage, Christine. Enjoy the conversation. Christine, it is wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You consult with creators on podcast strategy. You coach podcast hosts and production teams, and you also host your own podcast, which I love because you're in the mix. And after learning a bit about you, I have so many questions about your work. I love the medium of podcasts, and much like you've shared, listening to great podcasts was how I got the urge to start my own. Before we go deep into this, let's talk about your life a bit before the work you're currently doing. And first to start, where were you born and raised, and where do you live now?
That's such a great question, and it's really quick and easy. I was born in California, but we moved when I was 2, and we kept moving my whole childhood. So I literally am from like America, all the parts. But I now live in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I'm like kind of tucked up in the mountains, and it's been really wonderful. I've been here about 3 years, and I'm feeling it. It's a good spot for me right now.
I love Salt Lake City. Been there a bunch of times. My product partner is from that area. So yeah, hats off to the people of Salt Lake City. Beautiful people. So some people can work at their career and compartmentalize it. And you strike me as someone who needs to have their heart in their work. The way you took a deep dive transformational leadership course as you were transitioning must have felt like a really big leap into the work that you're doing. What were some of the key things that you learned about yourself when you went through that process? And maybe you can back up to like what led you into taking that course in the first place.
Totally. Yeah. I'll make the long story short because it's a fun one, but it totally sets the stage for how I got into transformation. So I was so normal, like my whole life, like 0 to 26, normal, went to school, got good grades, went to college, got good grades, got the corporate job, sat in the cubicle, 401k, everything was normal. And then it was about 2013 and I started listening to podcasts, kind of that early second wave. And I was obsessed. It was like those early self-development podcasts, School of Greatness, Rich Roll. I was so obsessed. I was listening to them nonstop and it literally blew my mind. I was like, people live another way. Like they don't have corporate jobs. They like talk about self-development. So in a classic millennial move at like, quarter life crisis, I was like, I'm done. I'm going to leave corporate world and I'm going to like do the other thing. I had no idea what like the other thing was. I just been listening to people on podcasts. So long story short, I cold emailed the host of one of these shows I've been listening to, Lewis Howes, and I convinced him to hire me. And that's a whole other story. So I moved to Los Angeles. I'd been living in Dallas, Texas. I became like eventually the producer of this podcast that had like inspired me. I learned everything on the job. I like restarted my career at age 27. And it was, as you can imagine, like you could read between the lines, it was quite an like extraordinary experience. And because I was working on a really powerful kind of self-development style show, like literally going to work every day was like, you never knew who was going to walk in the door. It could be like Brendan Burchard or Gary Vaynerchuk, or it could be like this world-renowned therapist who I didn't know of until that point. It was like Esther Perel. And you're like, oh, this is who we're talking to today.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just the most extraordinary experience. And because that was my work, uh, as you can imagine, that was absolutely what was going on in my personal life. So I was having a very transformational moment in my life. Obviously, I'd left the beaten path professionally, but I was also doing all of my own work for the first time in my life. I was therapy, coaches, every workshop, everything. And Lewis, when I had first moved to LA, had said, hey, my coach is in town doing a workshop. Do you want to go? I literally had no idea what that meant. I was just like, sure, cool, whatever. I'm in LA now. And so that was my entrance into like transformational work, was going to like a 4-month, emotional intelligence leadership based program. It was extremely profound. It was the first time I'd done any kind of like really confront my ego, kind of all these buzzwords that we use. And it was so profound and it was so amazing. And I made some incredible friends who I'm still close to this day. They become like family. And I ended up being a mentor of that program for the entire time I lived in LA for 4 years. So that was how I got into self-development. It's like a normal podcast listener who like takes it to the extreme. That's what ended up happening.
I love that story. And I identify so much with you. My entrance into self development was a little different. So I had finished high school, took a little time to work, spent some time in Europe teaching English as a second language. And
Ooh.
when I got home, I started working for a personal development company.
Oh,
So this
wow.
was back in like 91, 92.
Okay.
And
Yes.
we were, marketing, creating and marketing seminars and
Yeah.
selling tape programs, like cassette
Oh
tape
my
programs
gosh,
of like Tony
totally.
Robbins and Les Brown
Yeah.
and all the good things. And I ended up meeting my husband there. And that was my start. And so, interestingly, as you had shared, now after working with someone else producing their podcast, you
Yeah.
realized, hey, how can I use that skill? For me, it was being in that space, rubbing shoulders with really fascinating
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs. Maybe we should be entrepreneurs. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of parallels. I love it. And I love that you didn't allow the path that you had been on to mean that would be your trajectory. You were open
Yeah.
to trying new things.
Absolutely. I love that you have such like a rich, deep history in this kind of work because it is universal. Like now that I have the eyes to see, kind of, it's like anywhere in the world I see someone's work, I'm like, oh, that's like transformation, that's self-development. And for me, because I had not been raised with anything like that, and I was kind of coming into it in my 20s after a pretty significant life pivot, I was just wide open. I mean, transformation found me at like the perfect time because I remember being in my little apartment in Dallas where everything was like safe and secure and normal. Like all my friends were like, accountants and like everything was fun and cool and normal. And I remember right around the time I was like quitting my job and realizing I was going to do something drastic, thinking, this is like completely unguaranteed and unknown, but if you don't do it now, you'll never do it. Like it will never be easier to make a massive change and potentially have it all go south and like come back to the corporate world and like, come back to normal. It will never get easier. Like now is your moment. Because I was only 26, 27. And I just knew in my heart, like, this is your chance. Like I wasn't married yet. Like it was just like, You don't even have to ask anyone's permission. Like, this is the moment. And you're absolutely right. Like, because I made the choice and kind of leapt into the unknown, I did have a few things going for me, right? Like, I had a job and I had been to LA before. Like, I had a few friends out there. Like, there were a couple things like that were kind of giving me structure. But when I got to transformation, I was just like wide open. I mean, I was like, I've already moved across the country, left my corporate job, and everyone is like hoping that it turns out for me. So, what other things can I reinvent? What other parts of me are ready to, kind of sunset and open to a new chapter? And so I did, I went for it. And it still amazes me to this day because now I'm married. Now I'm thinking about like starting a family. Now I have my own business. Like I'm in a totally different chapter now. Like stability is again the goal. So that was a very unique chapter. It was like a 4-year run that was just so timely and so like kind of divinely orchestrated. But I will always look back to it as like one of the most extraordinary chapters in my life because I was willing to, as they say in transformation, go wherever we need to go. It's like, let's do this.
Oh, yeah, that is powerful. And letting your soul lead you and trusting yourself enough, because a lot of the work that I've personally been doing and I lead people into is this idea of looking within and not just following the narrative, really trying to
Yeah,
decide for yourself what is it that lights you up and what is it that you need to personally be doing. It can be challenging to have that road. So it's great you had some people supporting you, cheering you on who, like you
absolutely.
say, they're hoping it all works out for you. And even if they didn't fully understand it, having even one person in your corner is a beautiful thing. You've said that you're a woman of faith,
Yes.
and I'm a Jesus follower. And I really appreciated how you shared that you believe you're here to serve. And really,
Mm,
faith or not, I feel like this is such a powerful way to enter into work and business and truly every area of our life. How did your faith guide your decision to shift careers, or if it did? And if you're open to sharing, I just find this happens to many of us. Were there moments where doubt started to crowd out your faith?
yes, yes, yes.
So you are
Of
human. Okay,
course.
good.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This is really the meat of the whole thing. I'm so glad you brought this part of the journey up because I think it's interesting to live in a world where religion and faith are kind of they're out of vogue. They're considered passe and I get it. I get it. But it's interesting to take the lens on someone's life and be like, well, did faith influence you? And then like the stories that come out of that, I think are so fascinating when people are willing to ask. So yeah, I have been Christian my whole life. It's a big part of my life, but this isn't like normally what I lead with. And so as I was navigating self-development, which the way I entreed into it was very secular. Like none of the training or coaching I was going through had any kind of spiritual, religious context. So it was all a kind of a secular perspective. And yet, as I was listening to these podcasts, right, as I was like going to these trainings, as I was reading these books, as I was sitting in the studio listening to these podcasts being recorded at the School of Greatness, I had the lens of faith. So I was hearing everything through the lens of like, there's a bigger plan. There are like divine, loving beings here, like running the show. We all have a purpose. Like we come from love, we're going back to love. And that was so important for how I took in the experience of transformation. Um, if you've done any kind of transformation work, you may know like it's a wild world. People
Oh,
bring
yeah.
all kinds of things into those spaces, and very powerful energy emerges when people are doing their work. And so it was a profound experience because, like I said, like my friends and family were so supportive and also were like, we have literally zero idea what she's up to. Like, we're just hoping this works out for her. So it wasn't like I was calling home and being like, oh, like this is what I'm up to. And so I would go into these experiences and, whether it was the job or transformational work or new friendships or, navigating my own work. And I was always going into it with like, I'm here for a reason. Like I literally felt the divine through line. I was like, this was not my idea. Too many things are stacking up. Too many doors are opening. Like this is way beyond me. like something much bigger is going on. I was having such extraordinary experiences, both professionally and personally, that I was like, clearly there's a bigger purpose that I'm being prepared for. I really can't tell you what it is yet, but the cards are stacking up. And so that was really grounding for me. Like, as you can imagine, or anyone listening who's done a lot of like very disruptive work in their own life, it can be very ungrounding. Like it can feel like, oh my gosh, the foundation has gone. But my faith was intact. Like I was able to take my life down to the studs, and faith kind of held it together while I was rebuilding it. And I know that's not everyone's experience. And I'm not like, and this is how it should work for you. Not at all.
Right.
But for me, belief in like a higher power, a purpose on earth, the idea that we're here to serve and support each other, we're all trying to kind of get back to a heavenly home together. This was like a beautiful experience for me to go through transformation that way. And yeah, I mean, of course I would like run into people here and there who are also believers, and we'd have the most fascinating conversations. But by and large, it was a personal experience. Like it was a deeply intimate kind of experience with God, where I was like, you are taking me on a super unique path. I'm here for it. I also have no idea where we're going. So good thing you're in charge. And that was a lot of the experience, was just like keeping close to God through all of it. I mean, to this day, of course, being a business owner is its own wild, gnarly world. But I think that's like something most people don't ask about, but it's so foundational to how I've evolved.
I can so relate. It's like your faith is that compass, that north star, that anchor that doesn't allow you to float away. And at the same time, I really feel like in my faith, I feel like I'm invited into a safety net of being able to ask questions, any question, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel really held and I feel that groundedness in it.
Yeah.
And so it allows you to experiment, to get curious, and to just take some steps and see. Because until we take those steps, nothing's going to change, especially if you feel like this yearning to do something different.
Yes.
We can then instead, if we don't take those steps, we end up living with regret. And, which is worse, like taking a step and maybe needing to backtrack or never trying and
Oh,
having that
you
regret.
just said it. You just said it. What I think is okay, I don't know if you want to go here, but I think this is so fascinating. I'm
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, let me talk about it. So I was raised in like a faith that didn't do a lot of like flashy, like cool, fun stuff. So it wasn't like there was like a cool band at church on Sunday. And I
Mhm.
think like it's so fun. Like I kind of wish there were, but so is the age of social media and like YouTube and everything has evolved. And I've been exposed to a lot more of like mainstream Christian, like bands and really cool preachers. Like, I just love it so much because it's like not my faith, the way that like church is for me, but I just love it. And I think all the time about the differences and the similarities between transformation and kind of like megachurch teaching when it's done well. I mean, I'm not familiar enough, but like when I see someone like Stephen Furtick just like preaching on it, and I'm like, this is the most fascinating convergence of like neuroscience, NLP, transformation, religion, faith, God, Bible. And I'm like, what a world we live in. And I know
Mhm.
that you can have all kinds of opinions, and rightfully so, about this, but I really let like spirit guide me. And if I feel someone's energy is like aligned with, the divine and God, I'm like, I'm all about it. So I think it's a fascinating time to be alive, because it's this like maybe potentially unprecedented time where like secular transformation, spiritual understanding, faith, and religion are like having a convergence. And I'm just like here for it. I'm like, where do we go next? Like, this is incredible.
I feel the same. It is exciting because people are actually talking about their faith journey, whatever that might look like, and they're more open to it. And I've found in the spaces that I've been in, whenever faith comes up, I feel like a deep respect from people who are seeking a deeper
Yes.
connection to the creative force that brought them here, seeking
Yes.
a connection to something like where they're meant to be going. And yes, I've come across those people, some from my past, who there's a lot of fear around that and they kind of shut down. And everybody's at a different place in their journey. I get that. But I'm like you, I'm excited. I'm like, all right, where to next? And I love new ideas. I love getting excited about things. And yet I have that groundedness to be able to decipher, to tune in,
Yeah.
to tune into some wisdom as well.
Yeah.
And but I think that the main thing that has really come to play and that I see happening more and more, which I'm grateful for, is the respect for everyone and where they've come from and how they're living and just loving each other. Cause I really think like that
Hmm.
it comes back to that, right? Love others
Oh,
as I've loved you,
yeah.
right? Like that
Right.
throws the judgment out, that throws all of the rules out the window, and it makes it way more easeful. We get to just be loving. Imagine. Really? It's that simple?
Oh my gosh, I love that you put it there because as you were talking, I remembered and it like came to mind. So, like I said, the years I was in LA doing all kinds of really interesting work professionally, personally, workshops, etc. I was usually one of the only kind of obviously or, actively Christian people in the room. There were a ton of people who had previously been Christian and had a very challenging, hard
Right.
experience. So they'd left and that would obviously come up in the midst of a transformational space, like the scars of religion, understandably.
Hmm. Hmm.
But because I was in a good place with my faith and it was part of my story, the friends that I made through those years were so incredibly respectful and they were so curious and wonderful. And we would have the most beautiful conversations that were so, like you said, we think we're in a chapter where because there's freedom to explore, there's also a lot more freedom to like give people their space. Like I'm going to really respect you over here because I can see what you're doing is working for you. And I know you respect me over here doing something totally different with my life. And I love that. And I think it's like one of the most profound ways to remember we really are all here to support each other. If we just remember that, like the path looks very different for everyone, but when we remember who we are, it's very easy to love and respect each other.
Yeah, and I feel like we're at a time where we also need so much more of that. And it's wonderful seeing a light building in so many different groups of people
Yes.
wanting that. We want harmony. And the way you get a great song is with lots of different instruments, lots of different notes. You talk about music in church. Well, I was the one
Yeah.
leading the worship.
Yes.
And so, and I did that for quite a long time, and it's in me. You got to have all the different parts. We need everybody.
We
And
need everybody.
it allows us
Yeah.
to lead with love for sure. So what was it like? You sent the email to
Yeah.
Lewis Howe's podcast. And
Uh-huh.
what happened?
So what happened was I didn't know this, but he happened to be like in kind of a transition where he kind of sold off his first business and was just emerging into podcasting. And this isn't a secret, but if you listen to his early story, he started the School of Greatness podcast after he went through his own transformational experience. That was the catalyst for him
Mhm.
deciding to make an impact through this. So uh, I had cold emailed him and I ended up kind of just being like, hey, by the way, if you need like an apprentice, and then kind of just nurtured that along. And he was like looking for someone because he had just kind of pivoted out of his first company and was looking to do something more impactful. And I think he just saw that I was hungry and willing to work hard and kind of ambitious. So I moved out to LA about 6 months after I started working for him. And once I got there, it was just, I mean, fast track fire hose is like the easy way to say it. Like I started off as just the audio editor of the show. And within like a year, I had become like the producer. And then we were filming everything. And then there were masterminds and book launches. And then there were live events. And then there was like social media, like celebrity, like influencer was like just starting to be a word back in 2014. So I was literally with his brand for those four kind of 2014 to 2018, like the rise of the influencer in LA. And I got to see so many parts of how those businesses work, how those brands work, how the impact works. People from around the world emailing us every week talking about the impact of the show, how they changed their lives. Like it was just so extraordinary. I mean, truly credit to Lewis for like what he's created. And that was, I mean, like I said, I'll never take it for granted. I mean, it was very challenging in many ways. We were literally building the company from scratch and none of us knew what we were doing. So it was quite the education. The team was growing, we were like hiring more people, but I would never trade it because it was such a privilege to like be in the room, understand, see the off camera, behind the scenes, it was just an amazing way to meet some of these extraordinary people. If you've never listened to the show, kind of the kind of people who go on are like billionaires and Olympians and best-selling authors, just the people who've achieved greatness. And so I will never take that for granted. And it also taught me that we all have a very common through line in our human experience, and it's a reckoning with our worth. It's a reckoning with deciding we are worth something totally independent of our results. It didn't matter who came on that show. Their story always included a moment, usually a rock bottom moment, where they had to decide, am I going to own my worth totally independent of like what the world sees in me right now? And that was something that kind of came to me over the years. And I realized like, wow, it doesn't matter how successful, how much money, how famous, you are dealing with the exact same things I am. You may be a little further down the road in some departments, but in other ones, you're right there with me. And it really opened my eyes to understand the importance of owning our worth on an innate level, kind of the divine worth we come into the world with. Because it really was like a masterclass in we're all humans, we're all spiritual beings having a physical experience, we're all learning the same lessons, and the only way we, you know, get through life is by playing to our strengths, showing up with the gifts we've been given, and contributing to the world long before the accolades and the success and the money come. Like those are really just a cherry on top. And I know that's a trite phrase, but I saw too much and I heard too many stories. I was like, this is really the truth.
I agree. There's those moments in the dark that you're formed, kind of like a seed being planted right before it sprouts, and it's such a process. And there's sometimes a lot of pain and anguish involved as well.
Yes.
And yet hearing these stories, and I felt the same, like I've really enjoyed Lewis's podcast for a number of years now. I don't even know how many years I've been listening, but it's one of my favorites. And the people who he has on are such an encouragement and a testament to that story that, you might be in the dark now, but if you keep persevering and if you trust and you really follow that voice leading you in your purpose, you're going to get there. You just don't give up, find the group of people there to support you, to be in community with. And yeah, they're like some of the best teachers, these guests on these
Oh
podcasts.
my word. It's the most incredible medium. I mean, that's literally why I still work in it. I'm obsessed on all layers, guesting, hosting, producing, coaching. Any which way you cut the pie, I'm here for the podcast because, like you said, the intimacy and the vulnerability and the safe space to tell your story over an hour plus, like you don't have to do it in 2 minutes for like the soundbite on TV or the Instagram caption. It
Right.
is so profound. And yeah, hearing each other's, I think another power of listening to people tell their stories is you learn how to listen. You learn how to listen to another human's experience and see yourself in it. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, I think that's a skill we're losing and we desperately need in society. I think we all know this. It's not like this is a revelation, but I think the more we practice listening, the more we understand empathy and connection.
Absolutely. You are very passionate about your purpose, as we've been talking about. And I see that it infuses the quality and generosity of the content and resources that you also make available to people. And purpose, as I mentioned earlier, it's high on my list of important things as well, which is the topic that you talk a lot about, in that it's not enough to know your worth, you need to own it. So, what has working with the most successful people in the world in your role as a successful podcast producer taught you about self-worth?
I love this question. I think we live in such an interesting time because it's so easy to project an image of ourselves. And once that's projected, we have no control over how people will interpret it. And that's kind of something we're reckoning with right now on a lot of levels. But the difference between knowing who we are, like I know who I am, I know who Christine is, I know her flaws, her insecurities, her weaknesses, her brilliances, her talents, her strengths. It's one thing to know that. And if I just hid it and kind of buried it and kind of put it on the sidelines, it would really be of no use to myself or anyone. The difference between knowing our worth and owning it is when we come into ownership of all that we are, right? All the lessons, all the mistakes, all the beauties, all the talents, all the challenges. And we say, this is who I am. This is all of me. I accept and I respect it. And I know that I have a contribution to make. It's not like anyone else's. I can't like reveal it all to you in a moment, but I'm on purpose. I'm on the path. I will have a body of work at the end of my life that will be the testament of like who I am and what I did. That's what owning your worth looks like. And it's not about being able to prove it on like a bank account or a follower account or like, well, you can't prove that kind of worth, right? It's like an ownership on such an innate, deep level. And I really do believe it's like a divine knowing, like, oh, I come from divinity. Like, this is actually something I came into the world with. It can't be added to, it can't be taken away from. But when we choose to come into our life and we show up daily with that kind of ownership, we give our very best contribution to the world. And when I think about like something as lofty as world peace, I'm like, oh, well, I think if we all owned our worth, we'd get there pretty quick. Because what happens is when you own your worth, you can't help respecting everyone else's. Like that mirror is just innate. And so I really think that's how we get there as we learn to respect and own and value ourselves independent of our results. And then we start to do the same for others.
I like that picture of what will your body of work look like at the end of your life? I'm looking for a movie to watch or a new book to read. And it's like, well, what else have they been in or what else have they written? And I'll
Mm-hmm.
look. And it's crazy. You see like this massive body of work, some of these actors or authors. I've never translated that into, well, what is my body of work going to be? And so for people
Yeah.
who are, I've that's going to stay with me. I'm going to be noodling on that one the rest of the day. For people who maybe aren't putting out content or creating anything, at least
Yep.
they don't think they are, because I think we're all creating something in our
Mm-hmm.
persona, what we're giving to the world. How can we rediscover our self worth and what's possible for us when we do? And also, why is owning our worth also inviting others to do the same?
Mm. So let me answer that second question first. And I know that everyone listening can think of someone right now. Think of someone you know, or even just follow, you could know them in the internet lands, who owns their worth. Someone comes to mind because it's a spiritual knowing, it's an innate power and we all have it in us. So it's like when we see someone owning their worth, we know. It may look really confident, it may look really humble, but we know it's the carriage, it's the voice, it's the way they talk about themselves, the way they talk to others, the way they talk about their work. There's a confidence, a joy, a gratitude, a humility that goes with that. So when we own our worth, we become lighthouses. Like, I mean, it just happens, right? We all know people in our life who we just admire and love so much because they own their worth and they remind us what it looks like. And we have those examples. So that's what happens when we own our worth, which is such a cherry on top. We just keep reflecting that light and ability back to everyone in our sphere of influence.
Mm.
Shoot, what was the first question?
Yeah. How can you help others and how can you
Oh,
rediscover your
that's right.
self-worth, right? Because really it is about rediscovering it. I think, like you say, we were born with it. At one point we knew, and
Yes.
somehow we forgot along the way.
Exactly. So I think that's another beautiful thing to just acknowledge and embrace about ourselves. Not a one of us gets from childhood to adulthood without a ton of dings and scars and distractions and stories. Like it's just the human experience. Like we come into the world, precious little babies, just like we don't there's babies have done nothing. You can't show their worth on like a spreadsheet, but we love them and we think they're so full of worth. We're like, you're everything, you're priceless, and you can't do anything but cry. So we go from that state. And then by the time we're adults, oftentimes sooner, we just feel beat up and bruised and battered, self-doubt and distraction, like the list goes on and on. So when I talk about rediscovering our worth, it's not a finding, because we did know, I know, as much as we don't understand about like where we come from and how babies' minds work, we do know that they know they're worthy of eating and being held and being loved. So I think of it as a rediscovery, and it's a different experience for every one of us. But once we make the commitment and we start to let our curiosity lead us, which looks different for everyone, right? We start to find more and more sources that remind us of our worth. And in that rediscovery process, what I call kind of like worthful living, is a beautiful journey because it just keeps going. Like we can commit to it for life and we'll just keep finding new layers of our worth. And that to me is like, that, I mean, that's a life worth living. Like I'm here for it. I'm going to be on the journey for the rest of my time here because I just think it's the most beautiful rediscovery we can imagine.
It truly is. Oh, so knowing all of this, how can we own our worth through our voice and our message and our business and really through our overall life?
I think about this every day because I'm literally in the business of sharing your work, your voice, your words, your experiences through, your actual voice. And I think a lot about the responsibility we have to speak the truth, but know that everyone is having a unique experience. So our way isn't the way. But what happens is when we are willing to open our mouths, share the truth of what we've experienced from a place of humility and generosity and worth, like, here's the path I've walked, here's the lessons I've learned, here's the wisdom I've stumbled across. That's where the impact starts to really magnify quickly. And I mean, podcasting is just one example, but since it's on the table, I'll go there. I think all the years I've been in podcasting for 7 years now, and now I have my own agency where I coach many different podcasters, and it's the best. But having worked with so many extraordinary people and seeing them step into that role, because podcasting is very intimate, right? It's different than social media. It's different than writing a book or even being on YouTube. It has a really intimate quality to it. So seeing time and again people make that choice, like I'm going to turn the mic on and I'm going to share the truth of the stories of my life from a place of service and from a place of support. I love podcasting in that it's like traditionally free. Like it's like there's no barriers. Like
Right.
you have an internet connection. I know there's barriers in some parts of the world. I'm not trying to make light of like China and places where there's a lot of restriction, but in a lot of ways, anyone can tune in. And that to me is just one example, whether it's through your art, your business, your coaching, your teaching, the work you do in your home, in your sphere of influence among your friend circles, through your volunteering, whatever you're here for and whatever you spend your time doing, owning your worth while you share your work and your contribution is, I mean, it's enough. That right there is enough. There's really no more we need to be doing than that. And I really believe that. And we're in an interesting time. And there's a lot of distraction to tell us we need to be doing more, but it's just not true. Like I heard this phrase a couple of weeks ago in a meditation, and I've been noodling on it. I think it was a Sarah Blondin meditation. And she said, change nothing except for the amount of love you give to yourself. And I was just like, oh, well, that's it. Wouldn't everything change if we changed nothing but the amount of love we gave to ourselves? So I think that's just a little bit of how we can start to change the world by owning our worth through our work and through everything we do.
Oh, yeah. Everything would change. And, your podcast has some beautiful meditations. And I heard that one. That was episode
I'm so glad.
159.
Yes.
159, change nothing but the amount of love you give yourself. And that's one I want to listen to on repeat. And the other one I really liked, and I haven't gone through all of them, but obviously now I'm just going to, episode 157 of the Worthfull Project about why women's worth. That
Mm,
one brought me to tears in the best way because I felt connected immediately to the women of the world
Yeah.
and to the women in my lineage, right?
Yeah.
Going back generations. And this is something I talk about with a number of women in my life, actually, about how we are standing on the shoulders of the women who came before us. This is all so insightful. Wow. And so the work that I do is centered on wellness and self care. And I
Mm.
imagine that your work keeps your calendar really full. What are your top three self care practices?
Mm, they're simple, but they work. You can tell I'm kind of a minimalist. I'm like, listen, there's only so much bandwidth in a day. So, really simple when I wake up in the morning, I don't get on my phone. Probably the first hour, sometimes 2 hours of my day are just unplugged. Reading, journaling, literally lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, just being quiet and meditating, maybe talking to my husband. Getting outside and moving. I love to tidy in the morning. I'm like a tidier. So literally anything else I can do except be on my phone is what I do in the morning for the first hour or two. And that's massive because as you know, like the second I want to be distracted, there is endless distraction. So that's huge for me. I've been doing that for a few years and it makes all the difference. Kind of going back to technology, since I work in the tech industry, I have a few extra boundaries around tech so that the lines are clear. I got married a year ago. And obviously, during my honeymoon and wedding, like I just had my phone on Do Not Disturb. I have never taken it off. So my phone's been on Do Not Disturb for the last year plus, and I don't think I ever will because it is such a beautiful shift to not ever have like my phone go off. It's obviously there, and anytime I'm ready to check a message, I just tap the screen and like they're there for me. But it's been so profound to change the relationship with kind of me being at the beck and call of my devices. So that's another one that's really helped me specifically because I work in tech and it will just consume me all day if I let it. And then third, I mean, this is again very simple, but it's the truth. So I have been eating just like clean. I mean, I literally I don't subscribe to a certain diet, but I just 7, 8 years ago, I like read a few books and was like, oh, food matters. Eat clean. And it's, I love the Rich Roll podcast. He's like, I think of his like godfather of like health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it makes all the difference in the world. Like realizing that food is nourishment and nutrients, and literally everything we put in our body affects our spirit and our body. That's it. I mean, that's literally it. Like, I don't get my phone in the morning. I have my phone on Do Not Disturb and I eat well. That's
If
like how I keep going.
if more people did that, I think the state of our world truly would
Oh my
change.
gosh.
Right? Because when we're taking that space, particularly in the beginning of the day, we can really put our bodies first. And then that, our body is super connected to our spirit. So we can really tune in to how we want to show up in the world instead of following some kind of narrative that is outside of us. And I agree, like all of this, so good. Simplicity is the best because I've said before so many times, self care can seem like a massive checklist of items. And we feel like we have to be good girls and check them all off. And
Totally.
that doesn't help anyone. That makes us more stressed, more anxious. So it's like finding those few things that really help you. I'm so glad that you shared that, particularly because you're in the tech world. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the Worthfull Project, about what you're doing, what you're creating, what's coming next. How can people, get more of Christine?
Oh, well, with pleasure. Okay, so you already mentioned my personal podcast that I've been hosting for 4 years now. It's called the Worthfull Project. You can listen to it on any app or worthfulproject.com. And then the business side of what I do, podcasting, coaching, etc., that's all over at worthfulmedia.com. So that's my company. It's a boutique podcast agency. We have so many free resources. There's a podcast, there's blogs, there's just tons of goodies over there. So if you're thinking about podcasting or you are podcasting and you want to take a much more mindful and maybe impact focused approach, definitely check out the resources at Worthfull Media. You can find me on Instagram, but really the goods are on the podcasts and on the website. So Worthfull Project, Worthfull Media, pretty easy to find me.
Well, I'm so grateful that your team reached out to be on the show. I would love to hear, what are you most hopeful about now as you look towards the next quarter of this year?
Oh, I love this question. I have been thinking a lot about the last quarter of the year because it's been such a wild year and I'm emotionally overwhelmed like all the
Mm,
time. I think most people are.
mhm.
It's a really rough chapter for humans right now. And so I'm really hopeful about focusing on my sphere of influence. Like on the days when I've just been completely overwhelmed, I'm like, Christine, the only impact you can make is in your sphere of influence. And so this year, my mantra was I'm a creator. And it was all about really stepping into a maker role. And that's what I'm excited about for the rest of the year. Just literally focusing in as much as possible every day and creating and contributing and generating in my sphere of influence in my little world, both with podcasting, with with any way I can serve or help in my sphere. I'm going all in because I have to believe that if we each do that, we'll get through. And I can't do what you can do. And I can't do what like leaders of nations can do, but I can do what I can do. And so that's going to be my focus. And I am excited and I do have hope. And there are some days when I have to remind myself, but I really believe that I'm going to make and create in my sphere. And I'm going to trust that everyone else is going to do the same.
I love that so much. And I'm in it with you. I'm in it with you.
Yay!
I love this goal for the rest of the year. It's so beautiful. It really is about that direct connection. So good. So the details you shared, I'm going to link in the show notes. Christine, I so enjoyed hearing your story and all that you've created from such a heart of service and generosity. And I love how you're helping so many people refine their vision so they can live more fully into their purpose through the amazing medium of podcasting.
Thank you so much. This was such a delight.
To our listeners, thanks for listening. What part of our conversation is standing out the most to you right now? Is there a passion project or a shift in the way you're living or working that you're even more inspired to make? Or are you exploring with the idea of starting your own podcast? Christine and I would love to know. Please share this episode and tag us on Instagram at Sheila Abatello and at Worthfull Christine. And Worthfull has 2 L's. See you next time. Big blessings. Thank you so much for being here with me on the Connect podcast. If you like this episode, please share it with someone you think would enjoy it. Also, if you head over to iTunes to leave a review, I'd be so grateful. Let us know what your favorite parts were and what you'd like to hear more of. It will help us have a greater impact, elevating many more people to grow and succeed together. See you next time.